So let's keep talking about ASP.NET. Let's continue the conversation that we started on Tuesday. If you remember, there's a completely different way of thinking about web applications. Up to this point, we've been looking at single-page client-side web applications, right, where the content is dynamically generated by the front end, right, using JavaScript. And JavaScript using AJAX goes back to the server to retrieve data to update the front end. Yes? In ASP.NET, what we're looking at is mostly server-side content, right, being generated on the server side. Right? And we started looking at that on Tuesday. So let's continue playing around with that, okay? All right. So let's see, where were we? So these are the experiments we had started playing around with on Tuesday. We're looking at forms. I believe that's where we left off. And we had created a simple form that allowed us to submit the data to the server, right? And we noticed a big difference between the way forms behave normal plain old HTML and how they behave when they're taking over by the framework, right? When we add the run at server here, right? Thought I turned this off. Quiet. Right. So if I remove this server, we'll notice the default behavior of plain old HTML forms. All right, let's look at their behavior real quick. You'll notice that if I submit, notice that the text is gone, right? And that's the default behavior. HTML is a stateless protocol. It doesn't remember anything between one request or the next. Okay. ASP.NET adds, enhances HTML. Right. It builds on top of the existing HTML model and adds statefulness. Right. And the way it adds statefulness is a very clever way. It doesn't. Statefulness is delegated to the client. It is the client, or the page, who remembers things. It is not the server who remembers. It is a client, right? The server delegates a session, stateful information on the page. It encodes the state on the page so that it can then re-render the page next time around with the state encoded on the page. So if I now reload this, if I refresh this page, if I reload it, and now I submit something, remember this. I click on submit. Notice that it refreshes the same way as before, right? The page is being posted, is being reloaded, but now the text, right? The text is here. It's remembered between one request and the next. Okay, that's a very powerful feature that ASP.NET adds to the otherwise simple HTML. Okay. All right. So let's keep going. Now there's quite a few other things that are added that the ASP framework adds, and most of the notice what it's doing, right? It's taking the original input field. It's taking the original input field, view source. It's taking the original input field and it's adding the value here, which we didn't put there, right? We didn't put any value. There's no value here. For that, it is the server who is rewriting our input field, adding parameters, adding attributes, so that it can maintain state, right? So for instance, it added the type text, it added the value. So this is being rendered by the server, right? The server is taking over this input field, right, and re-rendering it. Well, there's actually several other versions of many other input fields and other components that are specific to the ASP.NET framework. They can be listed here in the toolbox. See the toolbox, right? The toolbox contains all sorts of components, right? That add many new features to the plain old HTML input fields and drop boxes and check boxes and whatnot. Okay, they enhance the HTML language, right? Adding new attributes, adding new behaviors that would otherwise be impossible with plain old HTML. Okay, well, it's not impossible. You would have to write them yourself. You know, add your own JavaScript, add your own, components. So what they've done is that they've created many components here that that abstract those behaviors into self-contained components that you can drag and drop and add to the page. Okay, so let's start playing around with a couple of these. Right. Excuse me. Let's add something very simple. Let's add one of the simplest of controls. Right, so let's create another web form. We'll say the label. Let's start brand new. Let's say label component. So in the label component, what you'll find is that all these components build on top of existing HTML components, right? But they rename them, give them more meaningful names, right? That capture more the meaning, right, of what you're using this particular HTML for. So the first one we're going to look at is ASP:label. Okay? All these components that we're going to look at from now on, they all start with the ASP namespace. Okay, this is to distinguish them from plain old HTML labels. I mean, HTML does have a label tag, yes, right? To be able to distinguish them between the plain vanilla HTML label and ASP's version of a label, right? We prepend the ASP namespace in front of it. Okay, right? The label. Now, these are all server-side components. These are components that are meant to be compiled and executed on the server, and they render, pre-compiled or pre-formatted HTML. Right. So let's create one and say label. They all have to have a run at server. Right. Usually, you should put an ID that identifies this label uniquely. Okay. Right now we're not going to need it, but I'm going to give it a name anyway. You definitely need it if you're going to need to reference it or refer to it from somewhere else. Like programmatically, you want to set the value of this label. Then you need to give it an ID. Right. For now, I'm just going to say label one. I'm going to say hello label. Okay. And notice that there's quite a few other things that we can add here. Enable. We can set the class, the fonts, all sorts of things that you can the foreground color. These are all things that you would normally use CSS for, or the style attribute for this, right? Okay. Well, the ASP has added all sorts of attributes that are that capture all these things specifically as attributes. Okay. So let's run this. Okay, there's a label. Okay, if we look at the source that's generated, right, it generates plain vanilla HTML. Where is it? Okay, for instance, the label, that label tag, ASP:label, really what it renders, it's a span. You see that? Okay, it gets replaced, compiled, executed, and replaced. The string gets replaced by just a plain old span. Okay. Now, what the powerful part of this is that you can programmatically manipulate that label. Okay, very much like we did in Angular, right? How do we do it in Angular? We said, well, here's a label or an input field or whatever. How did we tie that to the programmatic controller? We tied it with a model, didn't we? Right? We gave it, this is the content of this input field or label, right? We tied it to some controller by giving it part of a model. You say ng model, and then we gave it a name, right? Okay. And then within the controller, we can then refer to it through the scope. Yes? Well, same thing here. Similar over here. Same idea. By giving it an ID, I am tying it to some model. I am creating some kind of variable that is available across this page. Okay. So let's see. Let's create a controller, right, that can modify this hello label. Okay. The controller can be created here where we see the script. You see a script? Right. This script, right, is where you put your algorithm, or you put your code that manipulates your page. Right. Very similar, like you create a controller for a page in Angular, right? And that controller typically has control over either the entire page or a section of that page. Okay, make sense? Right. All right. So let's see. How can we programmatically, right, control what that label says? Right. Well, one of the things that we could do is that, just like in Angular, we had event handlers, right, that could be triggered because either we clicked on a button, or we clicked on something, or as we interact with the user interface here as well, we can grab certain events, right, that occur as we interact with this page. Right, there's quite a few predetermined events. One of the events is when the page first loads. Right, that's an event. The page first loads. We might want to do something, right, when the page first loads. So to indicate that we want to do something when the page loads, we can create a callback here. We're going to say public void page load. Okay. What we're doing here is that we're creating a function, right, that has a very specific name, a very specific signature, right, that will be invoked by the framework when that event occurs, right? And the event is called page_load. That's a very well-known event, right, that the framework will invoke every time the page loads, right? And here we might do certain things, such as maybe we could connect to the database, retrieve data, right, make it available so that it can be rendered by the page, right? So the page executes, and the very first thing that happens is that this function gets invoked. Okay, right? And it has to have exactly that name, and it has to have exactly the following signature. It has to have object, right? Sender. So sender represents who generated this event. Okay, it might have been a button that got invoked, or something that I clicked, or some kind of mechanism that invoked this, and also the arguments of the event. So yeah, so that event, right? This event is a very well-known event in the framework, right? And it gets invoked every time the page loads. Make sense? All right. All right. So what might we do here? Well, one of the things that we might do here is, for instance, we have access to any variables that the user interface might have created, right? Any model, any variable that any component, right, that is identified, right, specifically identified, we have access to it. So see that hello label, right? That hello label, we can access it from the loading of the page, right? You can say here hello label. There it is. See that, right? The IDE immediately identifies that, oh, there is a label called that, and it makes it available for me in as I type ahead, right? That hello label represents that label UI, user interface component, and it has all sorts of attributes. Okay, one of the attributes, if you say dot, you can see all the attributes that are available there. One of the attributes is the text attribute. I can set the text of the label programmatically. Okay, I can say the text is equal to hello world. Okay, so now I can programmatically interact and send data, send something, a data to be rendered in the front end. Make sense? All right, everybody okay? All right. So now instead of having this hard-coded label text, I'm not gonna have any text here. I'm gonna close this, and now the text will be dynamically inserted into that label. Okay, so let's run that. Close that. Let me refresh this. There it is. Hello world. So that hello world, what was injected by the page load event, it executed, it grabbed that hello label, right, and set its text attribute. If we look at the source code, we'll notice that there is no, the script is gone, right, and we have the span. See, the span has the actual text, hello world. So it gets rendered, everything gets rendered eventually into plain old HTML, right? But it was dynamically calculated on the server. Make sense? As opposed to in the client, right? Up to this point, we've been doing this all on the client, right? And following more or less the same idea, right? We name the HTML portion in the HTML, right? And then from a controller, we programmatically set the content of the UI, right? I mean, that's what we did when we were doing Angular and JavaScript and whatnot, right? So same thing here, okay? Now, up to this, the way we did it is to embed the script right inside of the page, as opposed to when we were doing Angular, right? We would separate it. We would have the HTML on one side, and we have the script in another file, right? Okay. Well, here too, you could do the same thing. You can split this into two files, right? The .aspx and a .cs, right? C#, and have the page load, instead of living embedded here in the ASPX, it could be in a separate sister C# file. Okay. And we'll do that a little later. For now, it makes it easier for me to keep everything in a single file. All right. All right. So I'll keep everything in the single file. All right. Everybody okay? All right. Right. So all right. So I have labels. I have other things such as buttons, right? I can create buttons. So let's create another one here. We say 10 buttons and event handlers. Okay. So for instance, I might have a label. I might have a label here. ASP label, and I'll give it a name. I'll say message label, and I'll say run at server, and I'll close that. Okay, right. I can then also have buttons. Right, I can say ASP a button. Notice that this is not button. There we go. This is not a regular HTML button, even though it might be rendered as a regular HTML button, right? This is an ASP colon button that has quite a few other things that it can do. Okay. First of all, we'll give it an ID. We'll give it set message label button. So this is a button that sets the message, right? If I click on it, I want to programmatically, set or modify the UI, right? So this is going to be run at the server. Also, I can set the text, or this is the label that is going to be displayed in the button. I'll say that this is set message, I'll call it. What else? Other things that I can do is, I'll close it for a second. Right? If I render this, right now it's only the button, right? Because the label is empty, right? The label has no text. What I want to happen is that when I click on the button, right, I want to modify the content somehow, right? So if I click on that, notice that it's refreshing, right? So it's being resubmitted and it's coming back to me, right? So I'm clicking it and it's being processed. So I want to do something. I want to create some event handler, right? To create an event handler, we'll notice that this has quite a few attributes here. One of the attributes is that we have several on event handlers, right? We can have on click, on command, on dispose, on init, on load. There's quite a few events that we can trigger, right? Let's look at the on click event. Right? And when we say equals, if you'll notice here, notice that the script at the top, this script over here is empty. You see that script? The script tag is empty. It has nothing in it. But if we go back to the button, right, and we say equal, notice that immediately it gives me an option to create an event handler. Okay? If I select it, it chooses a default name for the event handler. It's based on the ID of the button, right? And it appends the underscore click to the end of the name of the event handler. Okay? Also, you'll notice one other thing that it did is that it populated my script. You see that? It added a function with the same name. See that? Plus, it added the same signature we had earlier for the page load. You see that? Right? So now, what's going to happen is that this function will be invoked whenever the button gets called. Not on the client, on the server. Right? This function never makes it to the client. Right? So if I click on that button, what's going to happen is that the whole page is going to be submitted. Okay? And the server, on the server side, it'll say, this page was submitted because this button was clicked, right? And there's a plumbing that happens in the framework that says, and there is an event handler for this button when it gets clicked. Let me execute that function on the server again, right? This is all happening on the server. Once the page gets submitted, while the page gets submitted and it gets processed, right? All this is happening on the server. And then once everything executes, it gets re-rendered and then sent back to the client. Make sense? Right? So here we can programmatically do something, right? We can set that message label, right? We can say message label. We can set the text, right? Button was clicked. Okay? Right? So let's try that. Let's believe it's here. Let me refresh it. All right, so the label is empty. When I click on the set message, I click on it and notice that it came back saying that the button was clicked. Okay? I mean, nothing that we can't do, that we don't know already how to do this on JavaScript, right? Or Angular. You know, we could definitely do this on JavaScript, right? Nothing earth-shattering. But again, we're going slowly and showing you how you might manipulate the UI, right, with event handlers and whatnot. Okay. All right. Let's see what else. All right. So we have labels, we have buttons, right? What about let's add a couple more things here. Let's add input fields. Okay. You know, us inputting some data in here. So let's do that. Let's do add another form. We'll call this input fields. Input fields. Actually, text boxes. Text box. And buttons. Okay. So here, what we'll do is that instead of having that message hard-coded, okay, well, instead of having that message hard-coded, what we'll do is that we're going to allow you to enter the label that you want to set. Okay, so for instance, we might want to say that this is the label, the same label as before. Okay, ID will say that this is the message label, and run at server, which is empty at first. We're going to provide here an input, a button, right? ASP colon. Well, actually, no, not yet. Let's create an input field. So the equivalent of an input field in ASP is the text box. Okay, the text box can either be rendered as a single input field, or it can be rendered as a text area. Right, both are for inputting text. Right, one for a single line, another one for multi-line, but they're rendered both using the text box component. Okay. By default, the text box component renders as a single input field, one line. Okay, or you can configure it to have multiple lines, and then it will render as a text area. Okay, but it's used using the it's invoked with the same ASP colon text box. Okay, all right. So we'll have here ID, and we'll call this the message field. Okay, and this is run at server. Okay, so that's a text box for us to type something in, right? And what we could do here is, again, do the ASP button, right, ID, and we call this set message button, run at server, and we'll do an on click. If we click on that, we'll call that method. Right, and we need the text is set message. Okay, so what we could do is that instead of sending the label to a hard-coded value, what we could do is read the text from the input box, yes, from the input field, and set the label's value. Right, so what we could do here is message label, message label. We can set the text to be equal to whatever the text of the input field is, right? And the input field is message field get the text. So get the text from the input field and set it to the label, right? So we can programmatically set this. So let's run this real quick. So if we say hello, we set message, the label changes to hello. Okay, if it changes to hello world, set the message, it changes the label to hello world. Okay, very easy. Everybody good? All right, let's do some more. Let's do a simple calculator. So 130, simple calculator. Okay, and what we'll do is give two input fields. Right, give two input fields where you can type in the values of A and B, right? And if you click on plus, it'll add. Maybe if you click on minus, it'll subtract, right? And give the results on the label. So let's do that real quick. Let's see. We'll create A is equal to an input field. So this will be ASP text box. The ID is A. This is run at server. That's it. Then break. And let's declare the same thing for B. This is B. And I'll give it the name B and run at server. Very good. Then we'll have a label that shows the result. Okay? So we'll say C is equal to ASP colon label. This will be ID is C. Run at server. And I believe that's it. And we'll break. And finally, we'll add buttons that can either add or subtract, right? So we'll have here a button, ASP button ID is add. Okay. This is run at server. The text will be add, and the onClick will be will invoke the events handler add click. And right next to it, we'll put another button that subtracts. Subtract. And the event handler is equal, create a new one, subtract click. There we go. All right. So let's implement this real quick. If we go at the top, we'll notice that we have two event handlers that were added by the framework where we can invoke certain things here. Yes? Right, we can do some work. All right, so let's retrieve the values of A and B. Right? So we'll say these are all strings. Actually, no, let's so this is a string, string A. That's a string. This will be what? We'll get it from A dot text, right? That's what the field is called, A, right? Okay. Let me get the value of B. B string, B dot text. Okay. Let me convert them into an integer so I can add them or subtract them. So we'll say that int A will be convert to integer A string. So it's gonna parse those integers into numbers. Actually, no, it might be double. Right. So let's to double A string, and same thing. So this is a double, and this will be double B. It'll equal to convert to double B string. I can't type. Okay. And finally, we can calculate C to be A plus B. Yes? And now we have to set the text of the label. Correct? So let's set the text of the label. We'll say C.text is equal to C. Now it's going to complain because C is it's a double and the text is a string. So the easiest way to convert anything into a string is to concatenate it with an empty string. It's a very lazy way of converting something into a string, right? It'll cast everything to a string. All right, so let's try it out. Let's run this. So here it is. So we have A and B. If we type in here 10 and 20 and we click on add, right, it becomes 30, right? So that works. For subtraction, it would be very, very similar. Perhaps some of this code could be reused. And this is minus. Okay. If we say 40 minus 10, we can say subtract. It gives 30. Or if you add, it gives 50, subtract, or 30. Make sense? Everybody still with me? All right. Very good. Okay. Another thing that we need to learn how to do is distinguish between two. You know, when we do the page load, right? That event when the page gets loaded, there's actually two versions of that loading. One of them is if I type the URL and I type enter, right? That's a brand new loading of the page, right? That's a brand new loading of the page, right? Okay, notice that everything gets cleared out, right? As opposed to, right, if I type 10 and 20 and I click on add, notice that the page also refreshes. See that? The page refreshes, but in that case, in this particular case, it's reposting itself, right? And it's maintaining the state of the page, right? So if I click on submitting, notice that the page is refreshing. Page load is being invoked every single time I invoke this. You see that? But it's a different behavior if I type from the URL. You see that? There's a difference, okay? And we often need to be able to distinguish between the two. Is this the very first time you come into the page, or is the page being posted again? Okay, right? Well, in both cases, page load gets invoked on either case. But to be able to distinguish between the two, right, the framework provides a flag, right? A flag that says, is post back? You know, is the page being posted back again? Right? To be able to distinguish between, is this the very first time, or is this the second, you know, consecutive times that we are in a conversation? Is it the very first time I see the page, or is this now, am I part of a conversation, right, of requests that are coming back to me, right? We'd like to be able to distinguish between the two. All right, so let's distinguish between the two. Let's have here an experiment that allows us to distinguish between the two. So let's say 140 post back. Post back. Right? So what we want to be able to do is distinguish on whether when the page loads, it tells me whether it's the first time or consecutive times. Okay, so let's look at that. So what we want to do is let's create here a label that will tell me whether this is the first time or consecutive time. Right, the label will change one or the other, telling me whether it's one or it's the first time or not. Okay, so we'll have here the ASP label, right, and we'll have here an ID that says that this is a message label, and it's run at server. Okay, and then we'll have here an ASP button that, you know, when we first come to the page, it's because we didn't hit the button, right? But if you hit the button, is considered to be a postback, that the page is being reposted, right? So if it's loading because I clicked on the input at the top level field and I press enter, it is not being posted back, right? It's loading brand new, right? And I want to be able to catch that event, or I want to be able to distinguish if this is being reposted because that you clicked on a button, or you're somehow reacting to some control on the UI, right? I like to be able to distinguish that. So let me put here the button. Right, and posting is a posting button. Run at server, right? And it's going to have a text. You're going to say post back, right? Notice that I'm choosing these names, right? But the names don't mean anything, right? It's what it's whatever names I want to give them, right? It's not that it's going to do anything different other than the buttons that we've looked at so far, right? It's just going to repost the page back to the server. And I'm going to do an on-click. Actually, no, I'm not going to do an on-click. If the page gets reposted, that's fine. The page load is going to be rendered anyway, right? So let's do that. I'm not going to invoke any particular event handler, right? The page is just going to be re-rendered. It's going to be reposted. If it's reposted, either it's the first time or consecutive time. Either case, in both cases, the following method gets called: page load. Okay, object sender and event args, right? So in both cases, where it's the very first time or not, it's going to be this is going to be invoked. So here, well, let's just see what happens in both cases. In both cases, this gets called, so I'm going to set the message, right, text. I'm going to set it to loaded. Okay, right. So let's run this. Okay, it says loaded. Why does it say loaded? Because the page load got invoked, yes, and it set the message text to loaded, yes. Whether it's me navigating or clicking on this right at the top or posting, notice that in both cases, page load is setting the message text to loaded, right? Regardless of whether I'm doing either or. Okay, everybody okay? Right? In both cases, page load is being invoked, right? Notice that if this were not here, right? If this were not here and I reload, notice that the label is not there. See, the label has no value, right? The label has value because that function was being invoked, right? Notice that if I click here, right? Notice that the label has no value, or if I post, the label has no value. Only because I have that page load is being invoked, the label has a value. Make sense? And it gets invoked on either me loading the page from the URL or clicking on the button. In both cases, this function gets called. But oftentimes I want to distinguish on whether it's one or the other. Okay? And we'll see this in a minute on why we want to do one or the other. Okay? But first you need to understand how we can distinguish one or the other. Right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the flag that the framework sets for me on whether this is a first time or not, right? If this is the first time, the following flag is false, is postback. So postback is a Boolean expression, right? That it's either true or false, depending on whether this is the very first time or this is consecutive times because you're clicking on the button, right? If it's the first time that you come here, is postback will be false. Okay. If instead it's because you're clicking on a button and you're resubmitting the page, this is postback will be true. Okay. So, so we're going to set the message. We're going to say message.text, right? We're going to say is postback, right? Otherwise, we're going to say else. Say message.text, is not postback. Okay, right? So let's reload this. Okay, there it is. So if I click here and I refresh the page every time, okay, it says this is not a postback. It's a brand new reloading of the page, brand new, pristine. It is the very first time you come into this page. As opposed to if I click on postback, notice that it says, oh, no, okay, I've seen you. We are in a conversation. You're clicking on buttons. You're interacting with me, right? We're entering in a conversation. I am remembering this conversation. So it's you again, right? It's you again, submitting data, posting things, giving me data. We are in a conversation. Okay? Yes? Right? And we need, and sometimes we need to do certain things, one or the other, right? For instance, if this is the very first time that you come to the page, well, maybe that's a good time to load the database, load, and populate, array lists and drop boxes, drop downs and whatnot, right? But after that, after I went to the database once, I might not need to go back to the database, as you interact with me. Yes? So it would be wasteful that I would have to go to a database every single time. So I like to be able to distinguish we say, oh, wait a minute. Is this the very first time that we're having this conversation? If it is, let me set up, right? Otherwise, if we are in a conversation, I might have already loaded stuff and resources from the database, and I have it already in RAM. I might already have it in the session. I don't have to set up again, right? Because I've done that already. Make sense? Okay, so I need to be able to distinguish between the two. All right? Okay. All right, so let's continue. Another thing that we're gonna need to be able to so that's a very simple example, and we'll use it in a minute, right? But first we're looking at very simple minor things that you need to be able to do to be able to build anything interesting. Okay. Another thing that we're going to need, okay, is the ability to read the URL. Okay, the URL comes to us, right, and has a what's a URL? What does a URL has? A URL has, right, this URL, or it might have also input fields at the end, right, where you might say, the title of something, right, might be something, and you might provide also an ID, or you might provide a first name, right, and whatnot. We need to be able to parse that out and read that and extract that information, right? To read that information, we're going to use a very special object called the request object. Okay, so let's play around with that. So this is 150 parse query parameters with request object. Okay, what we want to do is let's do a very simple example. Okay, we want to put here in the label. Here's a label. Label, and this is and we'll call it again ID message label, and run at server. Okay, it has no value right now. Okay, if I run this, that label is empty. Okay, the label is empty, and I can certainly, set the value from the page load. Obviously, right? We've done that already. Let's do that. Let's do protected void page load, and this is object sender, and the event arguments E. Obviously, we can certainly set the text here. Okay. So if I refresh, right, obviously this message is coming from the page load, right? Obviously. What we want to be able to do is to read data that is coming to us as a parameter coming in the URL. Okay, so let's see how we could do that. For instance, we could do here, the way we do that is using the request object. This request object is one of those objects that get instantiated and created for us by the framework. Okay, it is an object that represents this URL. Actually, it represents everything that is coming from the browser. The browser provides tons of data to the server. Actually, we can look at that, right? We can inspect it. We can look at the network, right? And when this loads, we can see what's going on, right? This is the very first request. There it is. That's the very first request. If we look at it, we can see all the things that the client provides to the server, right? It provides the URL using a GET. It provides actually just the URL, just the URL. There's nothing else that it provides. General request response. Oh, actually, there it is. Request. It provides a URL plus a whole bunch of headers. It provides the accept header, the accept encoding header. Tons of stuff here. It says it identifies itself using a WebKit version, using that it's Chrome, right? It uses the machine where the browser is running. It provides the domain and the port number. It provides all sorts of things. Okay, so all of that is inside of the request object. Right. So the request object gives us an API to retrieve all that. Right. If we do request and say dot, you can get the browser, any certificates to the content length, any, if data is being provided in the request, it would be here. The content type, any cookies that the browser is providing, right? So this is an object, right, that represents everything that is coming from the client. Okay. Well, one of the things that it has also is a map. A map of all the parameters that might be provided at the end of the query, after the question mark, any query parameters that might be provided. And what we're going to do is we're going to parse out the title. Oh, my mouse is not working. My pad. What happened? Hello? What the heck? But it has a mouse I could use. Well, I guess I could use a touch. That's weird. Anyway. Oh, this doesn't scroll like that? Ah! Oh, got my mouse back. Sorry. Where was I? Right, the title. So what this is looking for is for a query string at the end of the question mark. Right now, there's nothing. There is none. Right. So we're going to, if we refresh this, notice that the label is empty. But if at the end of my query string I pass a parameter with the question mark at the end, I can say title is equal to Java 101. Okay, so that's a parameter. That title, right? Yeah, and any other parameters, ampersand, ID equal 321, ampersand, category, equal, language or course. All these parameters will be made available through the request object, and they're available through this map. Okay, here I am extracting just one of those parameters. I am extracting the one that is called title, which is right here. So the title is what? Java 101. So let me submit that. There it is, Java 101. See that? It's grabbing it from the parameters, right? And what are we doing that? What are we doing with that title? We are setting the text of the label. And that's where Java 101 comes up with. Everybody okay? Everybody good? All right, very good. Okay, so with this, we can play around with this a little bit, right? So let's create some forms, right? If you have forms, let's we can either create a couple of hyperlinks, href. We're going to point to ourselves. There it is, right? We're pointing to ourselves, and we're passing arguments at the end. We can say arguments, right? We can say the title. We can hard code it. Let's say this is ASP 101. Okay, so submit. Right. So let's remove all these attributes. Notice that it's empty, not because there were no parameters. But if I hover over this, you'll notice that in the URL I have title equal ASP 101, right? And I'm pointing to myself, so I'm passing to myself the parameter, right? So if I click on this, there it is, ASP 101. You see that? I passed to myself the parameter, but instead of me, it might have been somebody else, right? Somebody might have passed us that parameter, okay? Or it could be instead of a hyperlink, it could be an input field. So input name title, right? And if you submit with a button, right? This could be a form, and instead of being part of the let's see, wait a minute, input field name title. Yep, I'm going to submit and pass the name title with the value, whatever I type in there. Right. So let's refresh. Right. So if I type here whatever and I submit, oh, that didn't work. What happened? Oh, because it's posting. It's Hosting. Let me see, wait a minute. Oh, there it is. All right, it was hard-coded in the URL. It was hard-coded in the URL. But now that I type here and I say, no, Node.js 101, and I submit, okay, that is being posted to me, right? Programmatically and dynamically, and then I can always extract that information, right? I can programmatically do things as parameters that come to the page. All right, I think we have enough to start playing around with a couple of things. I think we have several base pieces of information about this. Right? Let's do one more thing. Let's do session. Let's say let's create a brand new web form. Wait, what happened? Oh, I'm not running. Add single page. Okay. And what number am I on? I'm on 150. Let's create another one. Add. We'll say 150. Session. Right. Sometimes we want to remember things, right? We want to remember things for quite a while as we're having a conversation. Now, up to this point, the way that the pages and the web in the framework remember things, right, is by encoding the information on a page. Okay, and we saw a limitation to that. Right, there was a limitation to that. One of the limitations we saw when we were looking at simple calculator, right? We saw here that as I submitted this, right, and we said A, we give it values, right, and we add it, we notice that as long as I'm interacting, it remembers those fields. You see that? Remembers those fields. But the moment I refresh, right, it does not remember us. Right? There is no encoding. It resets the state of the page as if it were brand new. It forgets everything we were conversing. Right? The dialogue gets thrown away. Right? The two-way conversation gets thrown away, and there's no way for me to remember things. Well, there's certain things, certain times that we do want to remember, regardless of whether you went out, maybe you went, you navigated away, you came back. I want to remember the conversation that we were. Maybe you logged in, right? And no matter what, right, whether you refresh the page or whatever you do, I want to remember you, right? For that, we're going to need an additional object called the session object, right? The session object is going to allow us to store information in there, right, and remember it as as long as we want. Typically, the session object it's eventually times out, right? So, for instance, because the session object is maintained not on the client, is maintained on the server. The server is going to remember information about you specifically, right? And that costs resources, right? It costs the server, it costs RAM, right? It might even cost it some, disk space, right? That might need to remember things. So it's something that is not very scalable, right? Because imagine having to remember things about thousands of people, right? It would be very expensive for the machine to be able to remember all these things about you. Okay, so use this with caution, right? When you start using session, then you're putting at risk the scalability of your application, right? But if you're throwing there a couple of strings, a couple of things, you should be okay, right? So let's play around with session. So here's session. So session allows us to store things in a session, right? So let's play around with that. So let's have here a label, right, where we can put stuff that we want to remember. So we'll have ID, and this is the message label, and this is run at server. And what we want to do here is we want to put stuff in the label. We want to put stuff in the label that might have been stored in a session, right? So for instance, what we might want to do is something like this. Let's see. We want to say, let's see, what is that example that I was using here? All right, let's do this. Let's do page load. I'll do protected. Oh no, where's the script? The script here. And say page load void page load that has the sender and has the event. Okay, we can retrieve things from the session, right? We can say maybe we can store something in the session. We can say session store my message here. Right? I want to put hello world. Okay, so I am storing that in the session, right? The very first time. And if I run this, okay, the label is not going to do anything, right? The label is just it's empty at first, okay. But if I now retrieve that session, right, and I say, hey label, message label, the text is going to be equal to, retrieve the data that I just stored in the session. Now sessions can store anything, right? Not only strings. Right here, I'm only storing a string. It can store any object, right? It could be even a list of objects. It's very sophisticated. It can store all sorts of things. Okay. So notice that it's complaining, saying that, hey, I can store anything. I can store objects, right? But you're telling me to retrieve something that is a string. So you need to explicitly cast this to the original data type that you need. So I'm going to cast this as a string. Now, when I refresh, there it is. I have my text that initially I stored in the session, right? And now, regardless of whether I reload, notice that it's not clearing out. It's staying. It's sticky, right? It's staying with me forever and ever, right? Well, eventual timeout, right? Typically, you can configure the timeout to be within seconds or minutes, right? You might have a default timeout to be 10 minutes. That means that perhaps the time that it takes me to log in, work with my application, step up, go to the bathroom, come back, and I'm still logged in. Yes? But if I took too long in the bathroom and I come back, the session might have timed out, and when I start interacting, all the data is gone. It doesn't remember. The server just throws it away. It assumes that you went away, right? And you're no longer in this session. Okay? So as long as I keep interacting with it, it starts a timer. See, every time I load the page, the server starts a timer. It says, you're alive, right? You are still interacting with me. It starts that timer, but when it goes beyond a certain amount of time, this hello world will be thrown away. And when I come back, it will be empty again. Okay? All right. So let's play around with this. I can clear the session. I can say session dot remove all. What this is going to do is says just throw away everything when the page loads. Just throw it away. Okay. So let's reload the page. Okay. Well, that time it's because I didn't set any text, right? But if I remove that and I bring this again, right? Notice this is the same code I had 2 seconds ago, right? Retrieve the message from the session and set the label text, right? If I refresh, notice that no matter what, right, the text is gone. The text is gone because I said session forget everything. right? It's no longer in the session. Make sense? Right? So let's do this programmatically. We can programmatically say, instead of doing this, what we could do is have buttons, right? We can have buttons that have here BR. We can have an input field, ASP dot a text box, and this is the message we want to remember. Here's the message that I want to remember, right? And then I can have a button that says ID, oops, remember button that says, if I click on that, I want you to remember the text. So remember. Okay. So in the remember, what I'm going to do is going to say, it's going to say, let's see, on click, it says create an event, the remember button. And what we want to be able to do is we're going to say, put in the session, put in the message, whatever is in my text box. That's what I want to remember, right? So I'm going to grab from the remember, wait, what do we call it? Message. Is that what it's called? Yeah, message. I'm going to grab the text from there and I'm going to put it in the session. Yes? I'm going to put it in the session. And I'm also going to update my label. I'm going to say my message label. I'm going to set the text to the message text. Okay? Yes? Right? And in the page load, I'm going to set my message label text to whatever is in the session. So that every time I come back, the message will be there. Okay? Let's see. Can you reload? Okay, there it is. So if I say, remember this. Remember this. So I say remember. Okay, so there it is, right? Now if I reload, notice that the label is sticky, right? It's remembering these things. Or I can set it, you can say forget this. So it's forget this, right? So notice that it remembers that. Whatever I type, it remembers from one request to the next, right? Or I might want to clear everything. I might want to have another button that says forget. So this is the forget button, right? And the text is forget, and the event is the forget button, which we can programmatically say to forget everything. Session dot remove all. So it'll forget everything, right? So if I come back and refresh, right? Notice that it's still remembering the forget this, right? If I click on forget, it's still there, but let me refresh. It's gone, right? It does not remember anything. Everybody okay? All right. Not only can I put text in there, that's what we're storing right now, right? Just plain text. But we can get more sophisticated and store entire objects in there. Okay? Let's do that. Let's try and do that. Okay, so we can say ASP and say what number are we in? We are at 150. So you can put another form. You can say 160 store object to session. Okay, so first we need an object. So let's create an object. Right, to create an object, well, first we'll need a class. Right, so let's create a class. All classes you should put under app code. Right, under there you can put any in any directory. I'm going to put it under 4550. I'm going to create here a class, and I'll call it course. And in here, so that's a constructor, right? And that's a class. I'm going to put it in a namespace. So a namespace, I'll call the namespace CS4550. I'll put this entire class in that namespace. Okay. And in that course, I'm going to put several fields. A course might have what? Let's see. It has a string. It has a title of the course, and it has a setter and a getter. It might also have a price, a setter, and a getter. And that's the default constructor. I'm going to create a constructor, an additional constructor that allows me to provide parameters for the title and a double for the price, so I can initialize my object instance. So it'll be this dot title equal title, and this dot price equal price. Okay, so this allows me to create instances of objects, and I want to be able to store an entire object in my session, right? So let's play around with that. Let's go here. Okay, so to do this, what we could do is that we can provide a form that allows me to create the course that I want to store in the session. Okay, all right. So let me do that. So let me create here an ASP text box that allows me to, I'll call this ID, what allows me to create the title of the course. So this is a title field, and this is run at server. Okay, and this is title, and this is BR, break, and the price of the course, right? And this will be, the field will be price field, and on the server, and then I want maybe a button here that allows me to create the button, right? The course. So this is a ASP button. The ID is create course button. This is run at, run at server, and this is let's see what else. The text will be create, and it'll invoke an on-click. It'll create an event, create the course. Okay. All right. So in here, what we're going to do here is what we're going to do is going to say we're going to instantiate the course. We're going to create an instance for the course. So let's see. We're going to say course. That's going to be in the namespace. What namespace do we put it in? CS4550, and there is course. There it is. So this is the course, or let's call it new course. New course equals new course, and we're going to provide for the title of the course. We're going to grab it from the text field of the course, of the title. Yes, I think it's called title field dot text, right? And we need the price. The price is a double, so we're going to have to convert it, right? We're going to have to convert it. So I'm going to do comma convert to double the field price field dot text. Right, so I think that's it. We instantiate. So there it is. We have an instance of the course, right? What we want to do is shove it into the session. Right, we're going to shove it into the session. So we're going to do session course. We're going to put here the new course. Okay, everybody good? Right. Now, what we want to be able to do is, well, retrieve that course, right? Get the course, right? So create puts it in there. How about another button that says, get the course back, right? So let's put another button here. BR, ASP button ID retrieve retrieve course button, and this is run at server, and this is text get course. And on click, it's going to say retrieve. We're going to create a new one, retrieve, right? And we're going to close this, right? So what do we want to do here? Okay, so what we could do is retrieve a course. We're going to retrieve it from the session. And the way we retrieve from the session is we're going to say CS4500, here's the object, the original object, right? Course. And we're going to get it from the session, right? Before we were storing plain old strings. This time we were storing an entire object, right? So before we had to cast the object that was in there from an object to a string. In this case, we have to cast it to an entire object. So we're going to cast it to a CS4550.course. So from the session, and it was course. There it is, right? And then once we have the course, what do we want to do with that course, right? Perhaps what we want to do is populate the fields again. How's that? You could do that, right? Repopulate the fields, right? So what we could do is, before we had instantiated the course from the field, right? The values in the field. Now what we're doing is that we're retrieving that from the session and we're repopulating the fields. See that? Right? So let's do that. So we're going to say title field set the text equal to the course get the title from the course, from the object, and the price field set the text equal to the course dot price. Now price is double. We have to convert it into a string, so we're going to concatenate it with an empty string so that it gets converted into a string. Okay. All right. So let's try that. Let's see if this blows up. Now, obviously, the if I click on get the course, this is going to blow up, right? Because it's going to come back as null. There is no course object, right? And when I try to dereference course null, right, to retrieve the title, this is going to fail. Right? It's going to give me a big null pointer exception, right? Let's try it. If I click on this, there it is. I got a null pointer exception. There is no course. Course is null. I tried to dereference null. There was no title for null. Make sense? Right, that makes sense. Let me stop that and just refresh the page. Okay, but if I store something in there, this is ASP.NET 101, price 321, right? And I say create, right, so presumably it's there, right? If I refresh this, notice there's nothing there, right? There's nothing there, right? It'll only retrieve it on demand get course. Right? So get course retrieved it from the session and repopulated the field. Right? Or what we could do, right? Well, first of all, what we should do is make sure that if course is not null, right? Then do all this, right? Protect ourselves, right? Or what we could do, so that notice that if I click here and I refresh, oh well, now it's remembering. There it is, right? When I flash, right? Notice that it forgets this, right? It forgets that. What we could do is on page load, we can also retrieve it, right? So what we could do is protected void page load, right? Object sender, comma, events, E. We could do the same thing, right? The same code that we have here. Actually, what we could do is put this all in a function, right? And what we could do is, as we come back, right, as the page loads, even if you didn't on demand tell me to retrieve it, on demand, when it gets loaded, I'll retrieve it from the session. I'll re-update the UI. Okay, so if I now refresh Okay, there it is, right? Page load is the one who's populating this. Everybody okay? Everybody good? All right. All right, let's keep going. We've got 5 minutes. Do I want to do this? All right, let's expand on this idea. Let's expand on this idea, right? So let me stop this. Okay. Let's create here. I want to create a list of courses. How's that? A list of courses. So not only can I store individual objects, instances in the course, I can store anything I want in there. Well, actually, not everything. Anything that is serializable. Right? Serializable means that it can be converted into a string or some binary representation, right? That can then be reread, right, and reconstituted into its original object instance form. Okay, and not everything is serializable, right? Obviously, strings, doubles, any of the primitive data types are serializable. Okay, if your data type, if your new class is written in terms of other classes that are also serializable, then your class is serializable. Okay, but if certain things are not serializable, like for instance, a file handle, right? That where you have a reference to a file, that's not serializable. Or if you have a connection, a live connection to a network, that's not serializable, right? If you have a connection to a database, that's not serializable. That cannot be reinstantiated and reconstituted to its original state. Okay, but everything, any of the other primitive data types are. Okay, and for the most part, that's what we're going to be using, just the primitive data types or classes that are written in terms of other primitive data types. Okay, all right. So let's create here another web form, and what we want to do here. Let's go to 200 and say a list of courses in session. Okay. So what we want to do here is so create a little UI that when it loads is going to look for a list of courses, and if there are any list of courses, it will render those courses. Okay. So let's get started. So let's first create, so since it's going to be a list of courses, we can either list them, render them as a list or render them as a table, right? So let's use a table to render these courses, right? So let's go here and say table and table row, maybe T head. In this head, we might have a form here, PH. And we have an input field, ASP text box, and this is the ID. This is going to be the title of the course, run at server, right? And then we're going to have another input field where you can tell me the price of the course, right? And then at the bottom, and the last one here, we're going to have TH. We're going to have a button, right? ASP button, whose ID is create course, right? And this is going to be, it's going to run at the server, and this is going to have a text of create, and it's going to have an on click that events that it says it calls a create button. So what is this going to do? It's going to create the new course, and it's going to put it in a list of courses, and it's going to put the whole thing in the session, right? For later on retrieval that we can use for rendering. Okay? All right, so let's do that. Let's come here, and it's going to grab that course. Let's instantiate the course, right? So it's in CS4550 course. Here's a new course. It's going to instantiate, right? New course, and it's going to grab as a title. It's going to grab the title field dot text, right? And then it's going to convert to double the price dot text. Oops. Okay. And then what's going to do, instead of just storing that one course, what it's going to do instead is going to keep track of a list of courses. Okay. All right. So we need the list of courses. Where's the list of courses? Presumably, we have stored it already in the session. Presumably. Obviously, the first time it's not going to be there. Right. So we need to retrieve it, check to see if it's null. Right. The very first time it will be null. Right. If it is null, we'll instantiate it and put it back in the session. All right. So let's do that. Let's get the list of courses. Right. So here's the courses. It's going to retrieve from the session list of CS course. Right. So we're going to cast it from this. So from the session, and here are the courses. At first, this is going to be null. Right. The very first time this will be null. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, well, if courses is indeed null, meaning this is the very first time we try to add a course to the session, we're going to instantiate it. We're going to say courses is equal to new, let's say new list of the CS4500 courses. Okay, we have a brand new course, right? So this will only happen the very first time. The very first time this will occur, when the list of courses is null in the session. But after that, regardless of whether this comes from a brand new list or a list that was already in the session, regardless, we're going to add to this list this brand new course that we just instantiated. New course. We added it to the list, right? Once we add it to the list, we're going to put it back in the session, right? Because we modified it, right? Right? If this had already other courses, well, I'm adding one, and I'm going to put it back in the session. You have to put it back in the session, right? So we're going to say session courses is equal to the courses. I put it back in the session. Make sense? First, I retrieve it. Right, I modify it and then I put it back in the session. Right, to render it. Okay, I think I'm beyond my time. All right, we'll need to continue this on next Tuesday. All right.